Pretoria's envoy to the United States, Ebrahim Rasool, says his second term in Washington presents probably one of the most difficult assignments that he's had to accept on behalf of South Africa. Speaking exclusively to SABC News after presenting his credentials to the outgoing US President Joe Biden on Monday, Ambassador Rasool indicated that he had a mandate to reset and rebuild the relationship with the United States, admitting that the country had earned the ire of a number of lawmakers in Congress over its foreign policy positions. This includes its efforts at the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza and its close relationship with the Russian Federation, among others. Here now is the full conversation between U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Peace and South Africa's ambassador to the United States.
Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool, welcome back to Washington, D.C. and back to the SABC News channel. It's good to see you.
Good to meet you again.
You presented your credentials to outgoing President Joe Biden on Monday. You will attend President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration next Monday. How are you, sir, navigating this changing of the guard and the acute implications it could have for Team South Africa?
I must say that this is probably going to be one of the most difficult assignments that I've had to accept on behalf of South Africa. The first time I came here, it was under President Obama. It was a language of solidarity. I think coming back now with President Trump, there's lots of uncertainty, but I do think that the interests of South Africa remain abiding. And we're going to have to pursue those interests, like our economic interests, like our socio-political interests. But I think we're doing it under enormously changed circumstances. So I would be lying if I did not admit to some nervousness about the assignment that awaits me.
Let's just talk about you being tapped by President Ramaphosa late last year to again lead South Africa's diplomatic efforts in Washington. You mentioned, of course, having served here under the during the Obama administration. What do you then view as the key priorities in the months ahead, particularly in the context of the incoming administration taking the reins next week? I mean, how did President Ramaphosa, for example, frame this assignment to you?
I think the mandate was very simple. The mandate is that we have to reset and rebuild our relationships with the United States. It's an admission that we have had setbacks. I think South Africa was in the afterglow of the apartheid era when I first came here, the afterglow of a very successful Soccer World Cup 2010, and in the anxiety of the health of a Nelson Mandela. And that gave us a lot of leverage. I think we now face different circumstances in the sense that South Africa may have earned the ire of quite a few in Congress and in Senate, that it may have earned the ire of quite a few people who misunderstand our principled positions that we have taken on human rights globally and misunderstand our non-alignment on certain issues. So there's quite a lot of explaining to do so that we are able to come to the key economic interests like the African Growth and Opportunities Act, like PEPFAR that fights HIV and AIDS, and like the continued investments that put so many jobs onto the table in South Africa.
There's no question, Ambassador, that there are definitely some Republican lawmakers in the main that have taken a hostile position towards South Africa. And of course, you are now dealing with this trifecta in Washington, right? The White House is going to be controlled by Republicans, the Senate will be controlled by Republicans, and the House of Representatives. It's well established that South Africa's close ties with Russia in particular, perceived or otherwise, has irritated some Republican lawmakers who are gunning for a review of the bilateral relationship with Pretoria, with potential consequences for South Africa's continued inclusion in the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which comes up for renewal later this year. Share with us your thinking. What's your strategy here? How are you going to navigate these choppy waters?
I think that South Africa has always maintained a distinction between being in BRICS as one of the emerging markets of the world, developing countries of the world, and being in alliance with others like Brazil and India, who are also emerging democracies in the world. We've had two different conversations. When we speak to the one group, we speak about economics. When we speak to the other group, we speak about our democratic, human rights-based values. So we make those distinctions, and that's what Washington would need to understand. I think, secondly, our role with regard to Ukraine continues to be one of mediation and conflict resolution. And I think we'll continue to play those kind of roles that must be there. But I also think that South Africa, to a large extent, remains a proxy for African interests, and therefore a kind of precipitate removal of South Africa from AGOA has enormous implications for Africa as a whole, let alone South Africa. And I think that we need to open up a language not only of one-way transactionality, but of mutuality and reciprocity. And I think that what South Africa and Africa has to offer the United States is more direct access to critical minerals that fuels the new economy, the fourth industrial revolution in the world. And I think the invitation to the United States is not simply to buy it from us raw, but to add value to it in South Africa, so that I think we can begin to explore the deal that could be on the table.
The Republican House of Representatives passed legislation last May that sought to review the bilateral relationship with South Africa over its foreign policy positions, most notably towards Russia, among others. The legislation was not taken up by the Democratic-controlled Senate, but is likely to be revived in the new Congress. Fox News, one of the influential conservative news networks here in the United States, ran a story in December warning of a showdown with Congress over South Africa's support for Russia, stating quite bluntly that the incoming administration could kick Pretoria out of the lucrative trade agreement known as AGOA. So the question then becomes, how do you then prove or make the case that the relationship, the close relationship that South Africa has with Russia, be that through military exercises, be that within the BRICS collective, its relationship with countries like China and Iran, does not impugn the national security interests of the United States?
Look, I think that people need to understand that this relationship that they perceive to be close to Russia is not such a one. We are members of BRICS. I think, secondly, Russia contributes less than 2% to our trade and therefore is not a major interest to us. But I think that what we need to understand is that we need to present South Africa's case as integral to the African case. And therefore, South Africa becomes the manufacturing hub of what is African products as a whole. So we've got to make that case. But we don't only have to make that case politically and economically to Congress and to Senate. We also need to make it to those who have a direct interest in the South Africa economy, who invest in South Africa, who trade with South Africa. And we've also got to make sure that we are reciprocal in our relationship.
Economics of the matter, if you look at sort of the posture of the incoming Trump administration, Trump in the main taking on close allies like Canada. I mean, they enjoy almost $1 trillion trading relationship, similar numbers with places like Mexico, big numbers with China, the European Union. And when you look at the trade relationship, around $25 billion between South Africa and the United States, this is small fry in that broader conversation. So I wonder to what extent the economic imperatives go to buttressing South Africa's arguments here, given the attacks you're seeing from Trump on economic relationships that are far bigger than the one that South Africa and the United States enjoys.
I'm hoping that it continues to be the case that the incoming administration focuses on who subtracts from the U.S. economy and not who adds to the U.S. economy. That's the fundamental difference between, say, South Africa and Canada. The Canada is seen as subtracting from the U.S. economy because it is sending what the U.S. already has in abundance, whereas South Africa adds to it because we add critical minerals and other things that the U.S. may not have in abundance. You see, we need to have the space to have those kind of conversations in the United States. And I suspect that that may be why President Cyril Ramaphosa doesn't want someone finding his feet in Washington, but being able to meet the right people immediately and on time.
The key interlocutors, I would imagine, would be the new chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, the senator from Idaho, Jim Risch, right? And he has taken a very aggressive posture towards South Africa. Back in 2023, he sought to move legislation in the Senate that would have removed the AGOA Forum, the hosting of the AGOA Forum in South Africa in 2023, particularly over the Lady R docking in Simonstown. He was quoted in Fox News in that December piece that he remained concerned about South Africa's efforts to cozy up to Russia, China and Iran, including Iranian proxies. I believe there he's referring to Hamas, warning that South Africa's foreign policy actions would remain a focus of his oversight actions. How do you plan to engage a Risch, a Tim Scott, the incoming Secretary of State, the former senator from Florida, Marco Rubio, that are Iran hawks, China hawks, and the perceptions here, right, matter in these conversations, whether the facts are there or not. We seem to be living in this post-truth environment where, as much as you put the case down, people have perceptions about this moving forward.
What I think is happening is a surprising, if from different angles, a surprising convergence between South Africa's desire to end wars and conflict and the Trump administration's desire to end wars and conflicts. I think that people are more worried that the ending of the conflict in Russia-Ukraine, the ending of the conflict in Palestine-Israel will be unfair rather than a continued conflict. The previous or the current administration was set on winning those conflicts. I think the incoming one may be more focused on ending those conflicts, and that's where the convergence is with South Africa's position of ending the conflicts. We may debate about the fairness of ending the conflicts, but we do not debate the need to end the conflicts. And so I think that what was wisdom a few months ago may not be the wisdom of the contemporary incoming period that we are facing.
We see a very hostile reaction to the International Criminal Court indicting the Israeli Prime Minister, his former defense minister. South Africa has taken a leading role at the International Court of Justice in relation to accusations that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. This has irritated Republican lawmakers, particularly in the House and the Senate. Is South Africa's support for Israel, principled as that might be, a problem in your U.S. relations moving forward?
I think it certainly is an issue in our relationship, but I do believe that South Africa has made the case. It has presented its memorials on the case, and I believe that South Africa will treat the case as sub judice, that I think that we have done our job. It is now up to the rest of the world to continue doing that job. South Africa can't continue to take it on the chin by itself any longer, even though we are principled about the matter. I think we need to also ensure that our interests are also achieved in the United States, because on the other end of those interests are also values related to the well-being of our people, the employment of our people, and the fight against poverty and HIV and AIDS. So I think South Africa has done what it could have done. It has led the way, but it doesn't need to fight alone all the way.
Ambassador, there's a sense that South Africa perhaps is coming here to the United States, with cap in hand. And I wonder how you ensure that South Africa's sovereignty, right, which is sacrosanct in terms of the UN Charter and our international relations with other countries. I mean, how is South Africa's sovereignty at risk of being undermined by the economic pressure that might be exerted by the United States? Is that problematic to you?
South Africa comes here on the back foot, but not cap in hand. I think at the end of the day, as I told an audience on Friday, I said to that audience, I'm reminded of the song by Cosby, Stills and Nash. If you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And the point that I'm making is that we would want this relationship with the United States. We do want to have the presidency of the G20 this year and hand it over intact and enhanced to President Trump at the end of December. We do want to have a mutuality in our relationship with the United States. We are coming here to make a deal, not to beg, not to plead.
The America First ideology, does it hurt the consensus-driven approach that South Africa will now seek to lead in terms of the G20, multilateralism writ large? We know that there is a history here of Trump seeking to undermine the consensus-driven approach in multilateral fora, and I wonder just how America First is going to play during South Africa's G20 presidency. Final question.
I think we need to be able to understand the sentiment that informs that approach by President Trump. We need to understand how does it converge without disenchantment with the multilateral world that is unilateral in its way of doing things, that is exclusive in the way in which it's doing things, and that it is sometimes unjust in the way in which it does things. So I think it's too early to say that there is divergence rather than convergence in our relationship with what is unfolding in the United States.
Ebrahim Rasool, it sounds like you have your work cut out for you, sir. South Africa's ambassador to Washington. Thank you very much indeed for speaking with us. We appreciate it.
And to you.